If you have lost someone and you find yourself, late at night, asking a question you have never been able to say out loud, not where did they go in some general sense, but what is actually happening to them right now, this exact second, tonight. And if every prayer you have whispered and every Mass card you have signed has not quieted that question, if you lie awake replaying whether the priest arrived in time, whether the words said over the bed actually did anything, whether the soul you loved is somewhere or nowhere, stay with me. That is not your imagination. That is not weak faith. That is a specific, recognizable, pastorally documented experience that millions of Catholics carry alone for years. Surveys of American Catholics consistently indicate that a large majority report never having received a clear parish explanation of what the Church actually teaches about the moments after death, and the average grieving Catholic carries unresolved theological uncertainty about a loved one's eternal state for the better part of a decade. That question you just recognized has a name, it has an answer, and it has a 2,000-year-old response, and your parish has never once delivered it clearly. Surface comfort religion and the institutional habit of pastoral vagueness made sure you never received the answer the tradition has always held. By the end of this video, you will know exactly why no one explained this to you, what actually happens the moment the heart stops, and the specific sacramental steps you can take starting tonight for the soul you love. Subscribe so you never miss what the Catholic tradition has always known, and what almost no one is saying out loud. To understand how this was buried, you have to go back to a hillside outside Jerusalem, around 165 BC, where a Jewish commander did something every Catholic has forgotten. The second book of Maccabees, chapter 12, verses 44 through 46, records that Judas Maccabeus took up a collection and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for an atonement offering for soldiers who had fallen in battle. Scripture then says plainly that it is a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, that they may be loosed from their sins. Read that again slowly. The living can act on behalf of the dead. The soul's journey is not sealed at the instant of death in a way that bars the living from helping. By 201 AD, Tertullian, in De Corona, was already describing the practice of offering prayers and sacrifices for the dead on the anniversary of their passing as something the Church simply did, not as innovation, but as inherited practice. The walls of the early Roman catacombs, including the Catacomb of Priscilla, carry inscriptions asking the living to remember the dead in their prayers, not as sentiment, but as transaction. Christ himself on the cross, in Luke chapter 23, verse 43, tells the thief beside him that today he will be with him in paradise, a personal, unmediated assurance offered in the final conscious second of a dying man's life. St. Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 13 through 15, describes the soul passing as if through fire, the work being tested, the person being saved, yet so as by fire. The verse that answers the question keeping you awake is in the Bible most American Catholics have never been told contains it. Then comes the formal articulation. The Council of Florence in 1439 and the Council of Trent in 1563 defined what had already been believed for 14 centuries, that there exists a state of purification for souls who die in God's friendship but are not yet fully ready for the immediate vision of God. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 1030 through 1032, states this in language that has not changed in any essential. Purgatory is purification. It is not punishment. It is not a second chance. It is the final stretching of the soul into a capacity to bear the unfiltered presence of God. The particular judgment, described in paragraphs 1021 and 1022, is not an interrogation in a celestial courtroom. It is the soul's first unmediated encounter with Christ, a meeting in perfect clarity and perfect love. Catherine of Genoa, in her treatise on purgatory, written in the late 15th century, described souls running toward the purifying fire, because that fire is the love of God burning away what cannot yet bear the weight of full union with Him. Read that sentence twice. The souls run toward it. What the Church actually teaches about that moment is closer to a homecoming than a courtroom. And here is where I have to tell you something, because 35 years of standing at the bedsides of the dying have not let me keep quiet. In 35 years of parish ministry, mostly in working-class American Catholic parishes, I have watched something happen in the final breath that no homily prepared the family for. I have watched a man rigid with terror receive the sacrament of the anointing of the sick and become visibly soft, visibly quiet, in a way the family later described as the room changing temperature. This is not poetic language. It is a pattern documented across generations of pastoral practice, recorded in chaplaincy records, observed by hospice nurses, who are not even Catholic. The sacrament does something. The Church teaches it does something. And then the family is sent home with the words, "She's at peace now," instead of the actual mechanism of what just happened. The Church had the answer. The parish replaced it with a platitude. Now stay with me, because the soul we are talking about is not metaphor. The Catechism, paragraph 366, teaches that every soul is created immediately by God and is immortal. Aquinas, in the supplement to the Summa Theologiae, question 69, lays out at length that the separated soul does not go to sleep. It perceives. It loves. It receives. Which means, and read this slowly, the prayer you offer tonight, in your kitchen, at the small table where you used to sit with the person you lost, reaches them. It is not a one-way emotional release. It is not a coping mechanism the priest is too polite to correct. It is transport. Your prayers are not therapy. They are transport. Saint Monica wept for Augustine for years across physical distance, and the Church has always taught that those tears crossed something. The modern grieving daughter who is told her rosary is just for her own comfort is being lied to by accident, not maliciously, but by a pastoral language that no longer knows how to say what it means. And then there is the Mass. Catechism paragraph 1371. Council of Trent, Session 22. The Mass offered for a specific soul applies the merits of Calvary to that soul's purification. 2,000 years of Mass cards. 2,000 years. The card in your wallet is not a sentiment. It is an act. Most Catholics today have never had the mechanism of a Mass card explained. And this is where I need you to do something, because the next part only reaches you if you know which kind of grief or shame you are carrying. There are 3. Listen carefully. Type 1 is the sudden loss Catholic. Someone you loved died without last rites. The car crash, the heart attack at 53, the phone call at 3 in the morning. Your private torment is the question, did the soul make it? And every well-meaning priest who has told you not to worry, they're in a better place, has accidentally deepened the doubt because vague reassurance against a specific terror sounds like a dodge. The correct response is the doctrine of perfect contrition, Catechism, paragraph 1452, the teaching that an act of contrition motivated by love of God, even outside formal confession, even in the final conscious second, even in the silent interior of a man dying alone in a hospital corridor, reconciles the soul. This is not modern liberalism. This is the Church's teaching since the patristic era. Type 2 is the long drift Catholic. It has been years. By years I mean long enough that something inside you stopped counting. Your private torment is the conviction that the door has closed on you, that what you have done specifically is different, that the line of people going into the confessional on Saturday afternoon is for someone else. The wrong response is a guilt-shaped homily. That confirms the closure. The correct response is Catechism paragraph 1422, which states plainly that the sacrament of reconciliation is always available to the baptized, that there is no expiration date, that 19 years away is not a barrier the priest cannot cross with you in 12 minutes on a Saturday afternoon. Type 3 is the faithful but terrified Catholic. You go to Mass. You go to confession. And you are afraid. For yourself. For your father who drifted. For the child who has not been to Mass in 8 years. The wrong response is more fear, more imagery of fire as torment, more emphasis on the narrowness of the gate. The correct response is the doctrine of mercy, Christ as judge and advocate at the same encounter, the same moment, the same face. Identified your type? Hold it. What heals one type silences another. The wrong words to the right wound make the wound permanent. Now we have to talk about why none of this reached you. And here is where the story changes, because what I am about to describe is not a conspiracy. It is something more devastating. It is a pastoral structural outcome. Beginning in the years following the Second Vatican Council and accelerating across the 1970s and 1980s, the language of specific Catholic eschatology, purgatory, particular judgment, mortal sin, indulgences for the dead began to recede from American homiletics. Studies of Catholic preaching from that era forward consistently document a sharp decline in mention of these doctrines from the pulpit. Surveys of seminary formation indicate that the number of curricular hours dedicated to the 4 last things diminished significantly across the same decades. No one decided to bury this. They simply stopped saying it. And here is the second twist, the one I have not been able to stop thinking about across 35 years. The answer was never disproven. It was outpriced by a softer one. Specific theology requires training, courage, and the willingness to say something at a funeral that the family might initially flinch at. Vague comfort is universally deliverable. It generates no friction. It fits inside the 7 minutes a priest has at a funeral he did not know the deceased well enough to personalize. The institutional economy of modern parish life selected for palatability over precision not by decision, but by gravity. The result is a generation of grieving Catholics receiving emotional management instead of doctrinal mercy, and a generation of lapsed Catholics receiving silence instead of the open door the Catechism explicitly describes. Consider, for a moment, what was lost in that exchange. In medieval and counter-Reformation parishes, the ordinary lay Catholic could explain in plain language what a Mass offered for a soul did, what the difference was between mortal and venial sin, what the act of contrition accomplished, why the anointing of the sick mattered in the final hour. Catechetical records from those eras document a precision of lay theological literacy that would shame most modern parish councils. The teaching was not reserved for clergy. It was the working vocabulary of grieving widows, fishermen's wives, men who had lost children to plague. They were given specific words for specific spiritual realities. They were not handed platitudes at the graveside. They knew what to do on the 7th day, the 30th day, the anniversary. The earlier generation of Catholics received specific answers that modern Catholics are being denied, not because the teaching changed, but because the delivery did. But here is what the tradition cannot erase, and this is the part that should make you sit forward. The doctrines that were softened are exactly the ones being rediscovered right now. Catholic survey data from the past several years indicates a measurable surge in interest among adults under 35 in the very teachings that were quietly set aside: purgatory, particular judgment, the precise mechanics of sacramental confession, indulgences applicable to the dead, catechism sales rise. Confessional lines in dioceses that have restored traditional preaching grow visibly longer year over year. Reports from parishes that have reintroduced clear catechesis on the 4 last things describe lapsed Catholics returning after 15, 20, 25 years away. What the institution softened, the soul still demanded. And yet the suppression continues at full visibility, and you have probably watched it without knowing what you were seeing. The contemporary funeral homily that canonizes everyone he is in heaven now. She is looking down on us. He is at peace sounds kind. It is the cruelest sentence at the funeral to the soul it describes. Because if the soul is already in heaven, the family stops praying. The Mass is not offered. The Rosary is not said. The 7th-day prayer is not said. The 30th-day prayer is not said. The anniversary Mass is not requested, and the soul, per Catechism paragraph 1030, loses what was owed it by the living. This is not theory. This is 2,000 years of pastoral teaching being undone by a single well-meaning sentence. Consider Margaret. A woman I will call Margaret, in her early 60s, walked into the back of a parish where I was hearing confessions on a Saturday afternoon. She had not been to confession since 1987, 23 years. She had convinced herself across those years that what she carried was specifically too much, that the door had quietly closed without anyone telling her, that she had crossed a line that had a name only she knew. She told me later she sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes before she came in. When she walked out of that confessional, her face was different. Not lighter, different. She told me weeks later that she stopped waking at 3 in the morning. She did not say she felt better. She said the question stopped. That is not sentiment. That is the sacrament doing what the Catechism, paragraph 1422, says it does. Consider also a retired schoolteacher I will call James, a man in his early 60s whose wife had died without last rites and who had carried that fact for 11 years. 11 years of waking at 4 in the morning. 11 years of avoiding the cemetery on the anniversary because the grief was indistinguishable from the doubt. When he was finally given the doctrine of perfect contrition in plain language, when someone finally explained that the Church teaches an interior act of love made by his wife in any conscious second of her final hours, reconciles the soul to God, he wept for 2 hours. Not from grief, from release, from 11 years of carrying a question that had an answer the entire time. And here is the third thing the institution cannot explain away. The proof was always inside. Saint Catherine of Genoa wrote her treatise in the late 15th century. Saint Padre Pio offered Mass for specific souls across decades and recorded what he understood to be their movement toward God. Street. Faustina's Diary of Divine Mercy contains entry after entry on souls aided by the Rosary, by Mass, by indulgences applied with intention, 2,000 years of saint testimony. Catechism, paragraphs 954 through 959 on the communion of saints, the bond between the Church triumphant in heaven, the Church suffering in purgatory, and the Church militant on earth, meaning you, tonight, in your kitchen, with a rosary you have not touched in months. The library was always open, no one handed you the key. So tonight, here is what the tradition has been telling Catholics for 2 millennia, plainly. If there is a soul you love who has died, you can call your parish office tomorrow morning and have a Mass offered for them by name. Catechism, paragraph 1032. This is not a donation. It is the application of Calvary's merits to a specific soul. Tonight, before you sleep, you can pray 1 decade of the Rosary and apply it specifically, by name, with intention. Tonight. The teaching on indulgences applicable to the dead, Catechism, paragraph 1471, is not a medieval relic. It is current. It is operative. It is the same mechanism the Church taught a peasant widow in 1340, and the same mechanism it teaches you tonight. And if you are the second type, the long-drift Catholic, the perfect contrition prayer, made tonight in your own kitchen, with sincere intention to receive the sacrament of confession, when reasonably possible, is the Church's teaching since the patristic era. Catechism, paragraph 1452. The door has not closed. It has never closed. The shame is not the truth. The mercy is. What you do in the next 48 hours has been working for 2,000 years. The teaching has not changed. The mechanism has not changed. The mercy has not changed. Only the delivery faltered. And so the soul you love, and your own soul. We are standing tonight at the same threshold the Church has been describing. Since a Jewish commander on a hillside outside Jerusalem ordered an offering for men who had already fallen, waiting only for the simple, specific, embarrassingly available thing the parish forgot to say out loud, the door was never closed. The hand that pointed to it just got quiet. This content is for educational and pastoral reflection purposes, only for personal spiritual guidance. Please consult a qualified Catholic priest or spiritual director.